Hi, how you doing? And welcome back to another video on the channel. So, because it's the international break and there's a bit more time between game weeks, I wanted to put out another wildcard team video, a little bit of a different one, just to give you some alternative options when you're looking at maybe wildcarding this game week, or even if you're just looking at some free transfer options. Hopefully, you'll find it really useful. If you do and you're new, please do subscribe to the channel, like the video. Honestly, the support this season has been amazing, and the last video I put out on Thursday, I think is my most liked video ever, which was just a really cool experience. So I just want to say thank you for all the support, all the comments. It's great to chat FPL. Let's get into it. So the team overall, so shout out to Fantasy Football Hub, is 97% rated, which is a super high rating. Now, data isn't everything, but it is good just to have a bit of a baseline safety net to kind of just have some assurances that we are on the right tracks. But there's so many variables in football, it can't be the be all and the end all. Do try and keep these teams to around 100 million so everyone can afford them. We do have some highly owned players as well in this squad that have risen in price, which if you already own them, you'll therefore save team value even further. So in goal, I am going for Riot. Now, not a super, popular pick right now, given that Arsenal have just conceded two to Sunderland, and Gabriel is potentially suffering from an injury on international duty. It remains to be seen how Arsenal are going to adapt to that if it's an issue. What I will say, however, is Arsenal do have some great strength in depth, especially in the defence and the way that they defend. It is more of a system more than relying on individual players. So it does mean that players can come in and the defense is still really good. The fixtures look great. The downside with Raya is that he doesn't make enough saves to get those save points. But as we've said before, quite like the goalkeepers that don't make loads of saves because it means the opposition are getting fewer chances and therefore clean sheets are more likely. Now, he is the most expensive goalkeeper on the game, and I wouldn't necessarily buy him in from scratch if you don't own him already. I think if you do have him, he is someone that you definitely want to keep. When we take a look at the chart, we can see expected goals conceded per 90 versus total points for goalkeepers. And we can see there's immediately three goalkeepers that stand out for having scored the most points so far this season. Rhodes from Sunderland, Pope from Newcastle, and Raya. I think Raya is just really good for the season, just to hold him in your team. I think Rhodes, especially, Sunderland aren't going to stay fourth in the Premier League. They are going to drop down eventually. And when that happens, it's going to be because they're losing games and not keeping clean sheets. So if you already own Roves, I think he's great and a good cheap option. But if you were wildcarding, I would look at possibly moving off him. Just the averages will say that he's unlikely to sustain that performance. And I think a Newcastle or an Arsenal goalkeeper is much more likely to give you points for the rest of the season. Another player could be Donnarumma. Now, he is lower down on total points just because he didn't play in the first 3 or 4 games of the season. So he is a few games behind in terms of point scoring opportunities than the goalkeepers at the far side of the chart. If you're not that keen on Raya or you want three outfield players and you have a spare Man City slot, I think Donnarumma is a really good shout because just the expected goals conceded is so low for all of these goalkeepers, really. I think he's someone that you can rely on over the course of the long term. When we take a look at Rose, especially because his expected goals conceded is quite in line with a lot of the other goalkeepers, I think that tells you that ultimately he will fall back into that pack as the season goes on. So into defence, and I have gone with Gabriel. And what I'm trying to do is make this team realistic. And chances are a lot of you will already own Gabriel in your wildcard team or in your original team. So you're not going to want to wildcard him out. And I'm not going to suggest to do that. I think you wait and see how this injury develops. If he remains out for 2 to 3 weeks, I think you hold him, to be honest. I think you keep him in your team on the bench. Hopefully, you've got a player that's on the bench that you can bring in for him because when he is back fit, unless he is out for months and months and months, you're going to want him in your 11 again. He ultimately becomes a great option whenever he is available. So I think he is a lot of money to hold up in defence, but I think it's worth just having it and just waiting and seeing. And the upside of having Gabriel in your team already is that he's the most expensive defender, so you can sell him to any other defender in FPL just with one free transfer, and it does free up a lot of flexibility with some additional funds in the meantime. The rest of the defense, kind of self-explanatory, really. Senesi, again, someone that you probably have had for a while, have some value tied up in him. That's not the main reason to keep him, but I think Bournemouth do have some good fixtures coming up. He is someone that we know can get defensive contribution points, and I don't really see a reason why you would either transfer him out or not get him on a wild card. I have opted for the double Liverpool defence. I think most players, most FPL managers, will have one Liverpool defender in their squad over the next few weeks. And it's a bit like what we saw with Arsenal a few weeks ago. You kind of want to get an advantage over other FPL managers by doubling up in the defence because I just don't see there being a lot of consistent attacking options for Liverpool where you look at those players and say they're absolutely nailed on. I want them to start in my team. Unless, of course, that's Salah and you've got a spare 14 million lying around in your transfer budget. So let's take a look at the chart and we're looking at defensive contributions per start versus bonus points because bonus points for defenders really do set them apart. You know, if they're keeping a clean sheet or they get an attacking contribution, who are the players that are going to get you those additional points on top? Because their performances mean that much more to their team's success. Well, immediately we can see that Gabriel is so far above everybody else. And I think that really does count for a lot. And it leans into what I was saying earlier about how Gabriel is just a great defender in FPL. And even if he's out for a couple of weeks, I think you hold him in your team. Would I buy him in if I was on a wild card right now? I probably wouldn't. I think I'd wait a few days and see how it goes. Maybe even get him in on a free transfer in the next couple of weeks if he remains out. But I think as soon as he is fit, the data just shows how much better he is than all the other defenders in FPL. Now, the rest of the lineup in the defence find themselves here on the chart. Now, we've got Senesi and Virgil van Dijk, who are consistently getting more than 10 defensive contributions per game, and Kanate is not too far behind. I think all three of those are really good because you combine their previous performances with the upcoming fixtures. So, how will these charts look in a few weeks? Well, I would suggest that Kanate and Van Dijk and Senesi, they're not going to be getting any worse for their data with the good fixtures they've got coming up. But if you did want to have a look at some other defenders in this chart, please do feel free to pause the video at any point and just take a look at who you think you might want instead of any of these. So into the midfield, and I've highlighted Phil Foden. I'm going for Phil Foden in this wildcard team. It's a pretty good midfield, all in all. There are some riskier picks, and someone like Foden definitely falls into that category. But because Man City, their fixtures are turning, Phil Foden does seem to be getting a bit of momentum in his recent performances. I think he is worth a shout. 8 million is not the worst price point in the world because you can quite easily sell him to a lot of other lower price midfielders around that 6.5, 7 million price range without hesitation. I think if you're looking at the next 5 or 6 game weeks as an isolated period, I could see getting him in. He's the sort of player who scores in bunches and then you take him out again if Man City's fixtures become worse, or if you can find another midfielder around the Christmas time whose minutes are a bit more nailed on. So into the chart we go, and it's goal involvements versus expected goal involvements for midfielders for the season. So all these midfielders have to have started 7 games so far this season out of 11. And when we see the line of best fit, we can see that basically, if you've seen the videos, you'll know the score with this. If a player is to the left or above the line, they're underperforming their expected goals. If they're to the right or underneath, they're overperforming their expected goals. So you can see that Semenyo on the far side is really overperforming his expected goals for the season. Even still, he's only expected to have got about 5 goal involvements. He's actually got 10. And we have noticed in the recent game weeks that Semenyo's actual output has dropped off a little bit. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if he continues to drop off a bit because players do tend to just revert to the line over the course of a season as you get a bigger sample size. But I also don't see the need to transfer him out. It's not like there is, a real need to sell because I think if Bournemouth do score goals, he is likely to be involved. And if you've owned him for a while, like I have, I got him in at the start of the season before game week 1, you've got a lot of money tied up in him. That doesn't really matter unless you want to get him back in the future. So you could sell Semenyo for a bit of a profit now. And if you've decided that you're not going to want him back at all, that's okay. You can use that money. If then there's a risk that in a few weeks you want him back and you've got to find that extra money to get him in at 8.1, for instance, I think that could be tricky with your transfer budget. So just bear in mind if you do own him, just because he's blank for a few weeks doesn't mean you need to sell. So I'm also going to highlight Bruno Fernandes and the rest of the midfield. Bruno is someone who can just get points from anywhere. I think he's a really good option for defensive contributions potential. Gets you some assists, gets you some goals. He's on penalties. And I know a lot of his chances come through set pieces, not through open play. But I would be interested to see when Man United lose some players to the African Cup of Nations, whether he gets put further forward in the midfield to a more attacking point of view, and then he does become a fantastic option. I've also highlighted Caicedo here. Now, he isn't in this team for his goal involvements. If anything, this chart should show you that you shouldn't get him in if you just want him to maintain his scoring output because he's really overperformed his expected goals so far this season. Anderson and Foden, however, are two players that are in my midfield in this team, and they are underperforming for the season. In fact, when we take a look at the last 6 game weeks for this data, we can see that all the midfielders kind of in a similar position, but Foden and Anderson, Foden especially, does stand out more for underperforming his expected goal involvements. He's supposed to be getting between 2 and 3. He's only gotten one. And what that says is that because players tend to drift towards the line the more the season goes on, in this small section, he's starting to play really well and could be very underrated. He's only 4.5% owned in FPL. If you were looking for a differential mid price midfielder, he could be the one for you. So let's take a look at the strikers. And again, there's not too much interesting strikers to talk about, really. It's Mateta and Haaland, and then it depends what you do with your third striker. And I think that also depends on whether you have a Gabriel or a Foden in your team, and whether you upgrade your third striker to someone who is a bit more reliable and play a 3-4-3 or a 4-3-3, something like that. I've decided to go for the 4-4-2 just because the strikers, the forwards, they're just not as valuable at the moment. Mateta and Haaland are probably the ones that everyone has in. And when we take a look at the chart, we can kind of see why. Now, we're going to change the chart a little bit today. We've got goal contributions versus bonus points. Now, the reason I wanted to show this is because really it shows how valuable the striker's goals are to the team. Striker might score slightly fewer goals than someone else, but when they score, if they're getting bonus points, that makes them more valuable than someone who might have just scored a few more goals and aren't getting the bonus points. Now we can see right at the top of the chart, Haaland is so far above everybody else, it's just silly, and there's no reason why you would overthink having him in your team, and you should really be captaining him no matter what the fixture at the moment. Mateta, on the other hand, is a little bit more interesting because he doesn't stand out for this data. Now, he is getting lots of chances and his output is good and his potential output is even better. But when he scores, I think because Crystal Palace have a lot of other solid contributors, whether that's Sa or even a Munoz or a Gehi, other players who are capable of getting bonus points. I think that does make Mateta a little bit of a worse option, especially when you compare to players like Bowen, João Pedro, and Thiago, because there's less contributing players, say in West Ham and Brentford, when Bowen and Thiago score, their bonus points will increase. They're more likely to get bonus points because there's less players contributing to the win. So therefore their goals matter more. And you could say the same to João Pedro as well. Scoring slightly less than Thiago, but a lot more bonus points in terms of across a season. So I just thought that was an interesting chart to kind of look and discuss and maybe just put Mateta into a bit more of a context when you're looking at overall point scoring rather than just goals. So let's take a look at the strengths of this team. And I think a strength is there's loads of popular players here. And this goes for my own FPL team as well. Sometimes it can be a little bit boring having highly owned players. And you definitely shouldn't have all highly owned players in your team. You should make some differential picks as well to try and climb the ranks. But the benefit of having these popular players is that if they don't do well, lots of FPL managers are also affected, and you're very unlikely to drop down your ranks. It's quite a safety sort of strategy just to try and maintain consistency in your mini leagues. I think there's also a lot of routes to points here. You can look at Gabriel and Van Dijk and say they have attacking threat as well as defensive point scoring ability, and the same for someone like a Bruno Fernandes and a Caicedo as well. They offer points on the defensive side and the offensive side on top of that. I think the weaknesses, however, are the bench. It's not a great bench. You don't usually need more than one bench player, but it depends if Gabriel is injured. If obviously Gabriel's injured in this team for a couple of weeks, Anderson comes in for him, and then you're looking at a Gui or a Hartman from Burnley as your first defender. Then it gets a little bit thin. I also think going into the festive fixtures around Christmas time, where the fixtures are coming thick and fast, and some teams are playing 3 times a week. I think maybe you do need a more reliable second bench player as well. But like I said, the value of this team is as so that you maybe own some of these players for a while, and therefore you can afford to upgrade your bench a little bit more. Another weakness is caught up in the value, and what I mean by that is that if you own players for a long time, you're quite reluctant to sell them because of this value. But as I said with Semenyo, it only really matters if you want these players back in. Don't not make transfers because you think, oh, this player's gone up 0.3 million since I got him in to start with. I don't want to lose that value. If you're never going to want that player again, just take the profit and then get someone else in. It's a bit like you wouldn't sort of sell Haaland, say, because you probably want Haaland in again, especially if you got him in when he was 14 mil. You sell him at 14.9, you'll get 14.4 million back. And then if you wanted him back in, you've got to find that extra 500,000 from somewhere. So just bear that in mind with your transfer strategy. Anyway, I hope all that makes sense. Hopefully you enjoy the video and the charts. Got some new charts in there as well. Please do leave a comment with your thoughts, any players that you're looking at in this team and thinking absolutely not for me, or vice versa. If you think you really like some of these players, let me know, as well as any other charts that you'd like me to see put in any videos. So thank you very much for listening. Hopefully you're enjoying the international break, and I will see you in the next one.